I wanted to talk about this particular topic of the mother wound in relationship to female led relationships because I think it's one of the shadows that operates in a female led relationship. And it's something which is really important to look at in relationships in general. One of the things that I tell my clients is that if they take the time to look back at the relationships in their life, a useful exercise that can be applied is to ask yourself, am I dating my mom? Am I dating my dad? Now, before you get all like, whoa, what do you mean by this? Here's what I mean. What I found is that a lot of times we are often dating people or getting involved with people, getting into a relationship because we're trying to heal the unresolved wounds from our childhood. And so, like, I start dating somebody, and there are qualities of that person that remind me on some level, maybe not on a conscious level, but on some level of my mom or my dad. And what I'm trying to do is heal myself through that relationship. This is a very problematic behavior because what ends up happening is you end up objectifying the other person. And you also put a lot of pressure on the relationship itself. That kind of pressure can undermine the success of a relationship because a lot of times what you're doing is you're not actually relating. You're projecting. You're projecting somebody else onto the person that you're involved with. And this is happening on an unconscious level. It's not like you sit out and we're like, I'm going to date this person because they remind me of my mom or anything else along those lines. You decided to get involved in the relationship because, you found you were attracted to the person. And you're like, "Oh, hey, this person's pretty sweet." Or "I like this person," or "There's something about this person that turns me on." But on some level, likely there was also something about the person that reminded you or that hit synced with a pattern with that inner wounded child, and the inner wounded child was like, this person can help me heal the mother wound, or this person can help me heal the father wound. And so I bring this up because it's a very important recognition to have with any type of relationship. And with female led relationships, this becomes very important as well, as we'll get into in a moment here. Welcome, Talia. Glad to have you here. So, one of the things that I've discovered about this particular aspect of relationship and recognizing the wounds and the trauma that are involved is that it can show up in particular dynamics in very specific ways as well. And speaking as somebody who is in a female led relationship and who definitely appreciates the qualities of being in a female led relationship, I nonetheless had to really grapple with this. And I still occasionally have to grapple with it and ask myself, where am I projecting my issues, my need for healing, my need for resolution onto this relationship and onto this other person? For a lot of men, we have both any people, period, women, men, other identified, have their mother and their father wounds. But I'm going to speak here to men because this is kind of what I'm looking at, and you may, regardless of whether you how you identify, you may find something useful here for yourself. So stick around. When I look at a female-led relationship, a lot of times one of the unconscious patterns that I see at work for the men is that they are trying to heal their relationship with their mom. And they're trying to do it in the guise of a female-led relationship. Their mom ended up becoming the authority in their life. Maybe their dad was never at home, or maybe their dad was also basically in a female-led relationship. I mean, I maintain that most relationships out there are actually covertly, at the very least, female-led relationships, whether men realize it or not. Um, and part of that is just observing men and women in public, and watching the way that a man will defer to the woman in his life and orient himself toward her. And in a lot of ways, she'll be taking charge in a very quiet and subtle kind of way, directing and guiding him. And sometimes it'll be in a very overt way. And it's like, on the one hand, he'll think that he might think that he's the quote unquote dominant man and everything else, and if anything, he's anything but. And this is not a comment on him or a comment on her. It is simply a fundamental recognition of the relationship dynamic that is at work, and how that relationship dynamic shapes and sculpts the experiences of our lives. And in a consciously chosen FLR, it's really important to recognize, like, where are my shadows around this? Where are my shadows coming up that could cause me to sabotage this relationship? One of the most important aspects of being in a relationship is that we learn to be relational. And learning to be relational means that we're looking at the relationship and we're asking ourselves, like, how am I choosing to consciously show up in this relationship versus unconsciously showing up? One of the ways that I see this unconscious dynamic play out is that a man will get into a relationship and he'll basically be trying to, quote unquote, win his mother's approval or her love or whatever else through this other person. Now, the other person, the person that he's dating, didn't ask for this. She doesn't want to be his mom. That is probably the last thing that she wants, unless of course it's a consciously chosen kink on her part, which, I mean, hey, more power to her if it is. But if it isn't, chances are it's something that she doesn't really want to be dealing with in her life. In that way, she doesn't want that projected on her. And I think that that is one of the things that often kills this dynamic, is that he is coming to her from a place of neediness. And part of his neediness is that he wants her approval. He wants her validation. So think about that for a moment. You're in this relationship and you're either trying to get someone else's approval and validation, or you're in the position where you're, quote unquote, the one who can give that. That puts a lot of pressure on the relationship. Now, it can be played with in some ways, and sometimes people do choose to play with it. I mean, that can be part of a power dynamic that's consciously chosen and explicitly discussed. But if it's not explicitly discussed, if it isn't brought out of the shadow and it's just operating from a place of unconscious patterning, then the problem is that it will derail the relationship, because those patterns will play out in ways that we don't often recognize. And I would argue that most people aren't aware of their unconscious patterns a lot of the time. I mean, I catch myself each day to some degree or another doing unconscious patterns that I'm working on breaking or changing, because I'm like, oh, this doesn't really work for me. And yet I still catch myself sometimes. So, and I say this as somebody who's had some experience around this. So if I can tell you that's the case with me, I can also tell you that that's the case with other people as well, because I've certainly seen it and observed it. And of course, don't necessarily take my word for it. Find out for yourself. That's one of the things I'll always advocate for, because I think when we take the time to find out for ourselves, that tells us a lot right there as to what is or what isn't working. Now, one of the things that I will also observe about this kind of relationship patterning that occurs unconsciously is that once it's recognized on a conscious level, it can be worked with and changed. And there are a few different ways that you can recognize your wounding around this particular area of your life. For a mother wound that is for a man who's operating with his mother wound, one of the things that he can do to recognize it is, first of all, look at his porn consumption and usage. It may seem odd to say that, but a lot of times when we look at porn, porn is basically a symptom of the issue at hand. A man who's drawn to a particular type of porn is usually trying to work out his issues with that porn through that porn usage, and he doesn't even realize it. He's like, "Oh, I'm really turned on by, a stepmom seducing a stepson." Okay, well, why is that? Well, chances are probably at the root of that turn on is the fact that he actually has this unresolved issue with his mom or his stepmom or both that hasn't been worked through. And he's trying to actually use porn, he doesn't even realize it, to resolve it. And of course that never works because it's not something he's recognizing on a conscious level, and it's not something that he's actually like fully grasping or seeing in himself. And you can apply this incidentally like to other things, like any person who is watching porn. This is the thing that I would share with you is just look at the porn that you're watching and treat it as, get curious about it. Just like really get curious. Like, why am I watching this? Why does this turn me on? Because chances are the reason it's turning you on is because, in part, there is some unresolved issues. This is one of the ways that porn gets people hooked and addicted because they're like, oh, wow, this is something that really, really, really grabs me. And I'm able to work my wound and my issues out through that. I strongly, strongly recommend not doing that, by the way. And it's an epidemic for men in particular. A lot of the reason why is because it's also a fantasy world where, quote unquote, the man is in control. He gets to have that fantasy and that experience and experience it in all the different ways that he wants to experience it. But of course, it's never really fulfilling. It doesn't bring the intimacy and the connection, which is really what we want. We want to be in relationship. All of us want to be in relationship. Now, that's one way you can identify it. The other way you can identify it is taking a look at the relationships that you've been in the past. Look at the type of people that you've been attracted to. And I'll use myself as an example. I found for myself that pretty much every woman that I dated, there were a couple things that they had in common. Most of them were older than me. Most of them had a tendency to very subtly dominate or control the relationship. And most of them were, were very much kind of in a position of authority in my life where I was trying to get their approval and validation. Now, I won't say every woman that I dated was older, but it was an interesting thing for me to to one day like really sit with and recognize and be like, wow, why is it that I'm dating a woman that is 15 years older than me? Or, why is it that I'm always finding myself, seeking out a woman who has a specific type of behavior or a specific way of being? And what I ended up discovering a lot of the time is that, the traits that like once I really looked at, I'm like, oh, the reason I'm attracted to this woman is this is bringing me back to the mother wound that I have around my stepmom. My stepmom was, quote unquote, the person in charge of the household. My dad was gone a lot of the time, and she basically ran the household. And at an early age, when she had kids of her own, I started to notice a disparity between the way that she treated her kids and the way she treated me. I was basically Cinderella. I was the person, I had to do all the household chores and all the other things. Whereas with her own kids, she spoiled them. And then, of course, there were some things that happened. And long story short, she ended up becoming very, very angry at me, not for something I did, but for something that another family member did. But that person had moved away. And I reminded her of him. So at that point, I could never get her approval or her love or validation. There was always this energy of anger and there was this energy of protectiveness around her kids. And it was something where she probably didn't even fully recognize the extent to which she was projecting anger that she had towards someone else onto me. Well, for me, young, impressionable me, what did I discover? One, I discovered I could never get the love and approval from her that I wanted to get because there was something about me that wasn't quite right. And two, as time went on, suddenly I was the recipient of all this anger. This catalyzed my relationship with women. And what I found is that I was always trying to get the approval and validation of older women in my life. And I was seeking out women who had tended to have a dominant way of taking control of the relationship. That was my mother wound. Now, I have fortunately done a lot of work around this and excavated it, and it hasn't changed the fact that I want to be in a female led relationship. Because I could see a guy watching this and being like, well, I want a female led relationship. Does this mean that suddenly I'm not going to be able to have the female led relationship that I want? That if I go and I do this work, suddenly I'm not going to have that? Well, not necessarily. It just means that you're going to get very conscious and real about what it is that you actually desire. And that is probably one of the most important steps that you could actually take because if you really want to be in this type of relationship, whether it's kinky or not, and we'll get into that in a moment here, it's important to be really clear and clean on like, why do you want this? Where is this desire coming from? And what's the shadows underneath this desire? Excavating those shadows doesn't automatically mean that suddenly that desire goes away. It just means that now you can be clean and clear about it and be like, well, yeah, I can see where I wanted this because X, Y, and Z, but now I don't want it for that reason. Now I can actually sit with it and say, well, why do I want it if I want it? And yeah, maybe in the end you'll decide you don't want it, but then you're doing yourself a favor because you're not repeating patterns of the past and putting them onto a relationship and projecting them onto the person that you're with. So you're sparing both you and that person a lot of pain and suffering that doesn't need to happen. One thing I want to note is that when most people hear about female led relationships, they think of female led relationships in terms of kink. And I'm a kinky guy myself, so I definitely enjoy kink aspects, but I want to be clear here that if you want to be in a female led or a woman led relationship, that's one of the other terms that's put out there, it doesn't automatically have to mean that you're into kink. Sometimes a man may want to be in a female led or woman led relationship just because he wants to be with a woman who takes charge and leads. And like I said earlier, I see that in so many different relationships out there where there isn't necessarily a kink component being happening. But what I see is just the subtle guidance and direction that ends up happening where she's really the one in charge. He may think he's in charge, but he's really not. So again, like just own it. Own what you really want. And own whatever flavors, whether it's vanilla or kinky or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that one of the most important things that we can do in all of this is that we can really take a good hard look at ourselves and look at the relationship dynamics that we want. And this applies really to each person. So, for a woman who's watching this, you might also ask yourself, well, why do I want to be in a female-led relationship? And take a look at your own wounding around that. Did you grow up in a household where one or both of your parents were really controlling, and as a result, you kind of learned, well, I need to be in control. I need to be in charge in order to feel safe. Own that. It's okay. Get clear and clean about it. Because again, the more that you understand why you want the relationship that you want or why you find yourself falling into specific patterns, the more it's going to help you recognize where that wounding comes up. And when we understand where that wounding has come from, it allows us to make better informed choices around who we are and what we want to do. One of the most important things that we can do with our mother or father wounds. I mean, I know I've mainly talked about the mother wound here, but the father wound is its own thing as well, is that we can give it enough space to actually like start connecting with that inner child and say like, look, let's help you heal, but let's help you heal outside of the context of a relationship. One of the reasons that I think this I really see this happening on both sides of a relationship, or more if you're in a polyamorous situation. One of the reasons why I think um, we're often so focused on healing ourselves through relationship is that we've been given the incredibly bad advice of, well, you can heal yourself through relationship. And that's not what a relationship is meant to do. Healing in a relationship puts an incredible amount of pressure on that relationship. And I want to be clear here. It's not like suddenly you should be like, "Oh, I should avoid conflict in a relationship," or I should avoid talking about my issues. That's not what I'm saying. And it's important to be relational. And honestly, conflict can be a healthy sign of a relationship when done right, when it isn't full of contempt and criticism and other things like that. When it's actually done in the right way, con- conflict can actually be an incredibly healthy thing for a relationship. But where it goes sideways a lot of the time is that we're operating from that place of the wound. So Sheena says there's also a difference between leadership and control. There's a naturalness to female leadership. Control is a power over dynamic that is unconsciously or mostly unconsciously acted out. Yeah, that's true. There is that difference between leadership and control. Getting back to I want to get back. I'll come back to that, but I want to get back to this what I was talking about. Here's what I would say. Healing in relationship can happen and can be a natural thing. Like there are times that I have brought stuff to my mistress and I've said to her, "Hey, here's things that I'm dealing with." And we've had some very healthy and good talks and discussions and things like that. And she's done the same with me. So I'm not saying that healing can never happen in a relationship. I'm just saying that it should never be the primary reason why you're in a relationship. And speaking as someone who's been there, done that, I can tell you that that can take on a life of its own that significantly takes away from the relationship. And here's the reality too. You can end up doing a lot of healing in that relationship and at a certain point be like, well, why am I with this person anymore? I've done the healing I need to do. And at that point, like something is fundamentally changed in the relationship itself because you've basically been involved with the projection that you put onto that person. So what I would say is that this is where like you really can't do this work on your own, and it's not meant to be done in a romantic relationship. It's meant to be done in other containers. Now that could be seeing a therapist. It could be working with a coach. One of the things that I'm offering right now is, and I'm going to put it in here for men, is the Sovereign Code cohort. This is going to be an 8-week program where we dig into some of these issues in further detail and unpack and excavate where the mother wound is showing up, the sexual shadow, all of these other things that show up in an FLR. And we're going to look at like where you may have a tendency to try and top from the bottom and what's going on there. And we're going to excavate all this together in a supportive environment where you get to do this work and you're doing it outside of the relationship so that you can bring it back into the relationship and you can kind of like, oh, I see where my mother wound is showing up and I can make a different choice. Or I see where I'm trying to top from the bottom, or I see where this other pattern is showing up because I've talked about it with other people outside of the context of the relationship itself. And at that point, what you're doing is you're giving yourself, your partner, and the relationship that you're in the space to breathe, which is really important. I cannot emphasize just how important that is, because all too often what I see are people who are in relationships where they're actually smothering each other and themselves because they're too close to the pain. They're too close to the suffering, and they haven't given it the space it needs to breathe so that they can fully see and recognize, like, hey, this is what's going on here. Now, I want to come back to what Sheena said. I think that, it is really important to acknowledge that there is a certain level of naturalness when it comes to a female led or a woman led relationship. This is one of the reasons why, as I said, when I look and I see the majority of people out there and in relationship, I end up seeing that it's really the woman who's calling the shots. And often she's doing it in a way where like it's an unconscious pattern. In a way, it's a natural pattern, but the reason why it ends up happening is because she's organizing the household. She's the person that the household orients itself around. An FLR or LWLR or whatever we want to call it ends up creating a conscious orientation toward that. The man consciously recognizes his desire for a female-led relationship, consciously decides to orient to her, and she in turn receives it. Now, one thing I'll also say is that right now, there is, one of the prevalent themes that I see a lot of the times is like, don't be a nice guy for men. And the idea is like a nice guy is a codependent man who is a people pleaser and he's trying to seek validation from, the people that he's with in his life. And the difference between an FLR and a codependent people pleaser is pretty much this. A submissive man or a man who's chosen an FLR has consciously chosen that and recognizes that desire. He also recognizes that he's able to choose himself. And in fact, the way that I work with men is I teach them how to choose themselves first so that they can choose an FLR. It's actually the way I work with people in general. Learn how to choose yourself first, because by choosing yourself first, you are actually operating from a place of integrity when it comes to your desires. This is one of the biggest challenges is like when we are out of integrity with our desires, it's often because we're not being real about like the fact that like, oh, I want this, and at the same time, like I'm giving part of myself away in order to get this thing. We don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be a transaction like that. It could actually be a very real connection. And it takes some work. So if you're interested, check out the Sovereign Code. I'll have information below. It's going to be starting up on August 20th. And this is going to be a way for you and me to connect. I'm going to be talking about it for the next month and a half, so you'll definitely hear more about it as we continue on. And really, this is designed to help you start to do this work. And here's the thing. Here's where I'm going to be real with you. An 8-week program is not going to solve all of your problems or anything else. But what it will do is it will help you excavate part of your shadow, get that scoop that allows you to start making the change in your life and helps you to step more consciously into your relationship. All right. Thank you for watching today. And I hope all of you take care. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them either in the Substack post or on YouTube. All right. Take care.